In the vast darkness between stars where even the bravest soldiers whisper prayers to gods they've forgotten, there exists a truth that military academies don't teach and veteran warriors refuse to speak aloud. Some fears are not weaknesses to overcome, but warnings to heed. When humanity first stepped into the galactic arena, we brought with us our greatest strength, not our weapons, not our technology, but our ability to recognize the monsters that others had learned to ignore. This is the story of Ember, a human communications specialist whose irrational fears about an alien species called the Kethmori made her the laughingstock of the Galactic Defense Coalition. Her fellow soldiers, hardened veterans from a dozen worlds, mocked her trembling hands and sleepless nights. They called her paranoid, broken, unfit for duty. They were wrong. Sometimes the monsters we fear in the dark are real. Sometimes they remember our names. And sometimes, being afraid is the only thing that keeps us alive long enough to fight back. What happens when the predator you've been running from finally catches your scent? What do you do when it speaks your name in a voice that shouldn't exist? And how do you convince a galaxy of warriors that the enemy they've been hunting is actually hunting them? The answer lies in the story of a woman who refused to stop being afraid, even when fear itself became her greatest weapon. The mess hall of the Coalition cruiser Meridian's Edge buzzed with the usual mixture of languages, laughter, and the metallic clink of utensils against synthetic plates. Representatives from 47 different species shared meals, stories, and the unspoken bond that came from serving together on the galaxy's most dangerous frontier. The air recyclers worked overtime to filter the complex mixture of atmospheric requirements, creating a slightly metallic taste that everyone had learned to ignore. Ember sat alone at table 17, picking at her protein ration while trying to become invisible. At 26 standard years, she was young for a communications specialist aboard a flagship vessel, but her skill with xenolinguistics and her ability to decode even the most complex alien transmissions had earned her a place among the Coalition's elite. What hadn't earned her any respect was her uncontrollable reaction to one particular species aboard the ship. The Kethmori delegation sat 3 tables away, their 7-foot frames hunched over meals that looked disturbingly similar to raw meat. Their skin had a translucent quality that revealed the dark network of veins beneath, and their elongated skulls housed eyes that seemed to track movement even when they appeared to be focused elsewhere. To everyone else in the Coalition, they were valuable allies, peaceful traders and diplomats who had helped broker several crucial peace treaties in the Outer Rim conflicts. To Ember, they were nightmares made flesh. She forced herself to take another bite of her ration, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the Kethmori ambassador, Velta, turn his head in her direction. For just a moment, their eyes met across the crowded mess hall, and Ember felt that familiar ice-cold sensation crawl down her spine. Veltar's lipless mouth curved into what might have been a smile before he returned his attention to his companions. "Still jumping at shadows, Chen?" The voice belonged to Sergeant Major Korvac, a Zentorian whose reptilian features and battle-scarred hide marked him as a veteran of the Proxima Wars. He dropped into the seat across from her with the casual confidence of someone who had never encountered a fear he couldn't punch his way through. "I'm not jumping at anything," Ember replied, though her voice carried less conviction than she would have liked. "Right." Korvac's forked tongue flicked out briefly, tasting her emotional state in the way his species did. "That's why you've been avoiding the diplomatic sections for 3 weeks. Command is starting to notice, you know. They need their best translator working on the Kethmori cultural exchange protocols." Ember's stomach clenched. The cultural exchange was supposed to be the mission's crowning achievement, a comprehensive study that would allow the Coalition to better understand and work with the Kethmori in future operations. As the ship's primary xenolinguist, she was supposed to be heading the project. Instead, she'd been making excuses and delegating the work to junior staff members who lacked her experience. "I've been busy with other projects," she said weakly. "Bullshit." The word came from Lieutenant Torres, a human from the lunar colonies who slid into the seat next to Korvac. His dark eyes held no sympathy. "You've been hiding because you're afraid of our allies. Do you have any idea how that looks to the other species? Humans are supposed to be the tough ones, the crazy ones, who'll charge into plasma fire without blinking. And here you are, cowering from diplomats." "They're not just diplomats," Ember said before she could stop herself. "Oh, here we go." Torres leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Let me guess. Your intuition is telling you they're dangerous again, just like it did during the briefings and the welcome ceremony and every single time you've been in the same room as them." The conversation was drawing attention now. Ember noticed several nearby tables had gone quiet, their occupants listening with the sort of eager anticipation that came before entertainment. She wanted to leave, to escape to her quarters where she could pretend the rest of the galaxy didn't exist. But Torres wasn't done. "You know what I think?" he continued, his voice carrying clearly across the mess hall. "I think our little translator here watched too many horror vids as a kid. Got herself all worked up about the scary aliens with the big teeth and the pale skin. Never mind that they've been nothing but helpful since they joined the coalition. That's enough." The voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. Captain Sarah Martinez appeared beside their table, her expression unreadable. The captain was a legend in the coalition fleet, a human who had risen through the ranks by being smarter, tougher, and more adaptable than anyone else. Her word was law aboard the Meridian's edge. "With respect, Captain," Torres said, "someone needs to address the elephant in the room. Chen's fears are affecting mission efficiency." Martinez's grey eyes fixed on Torres with the sort of look that had made admirals reconsider their career choices. "Specialist Chen's psychological profile and fitness for duty are my concern, Lieutenant, not yours." Torres had the sense to look chastened, but Ember could see the doubt in his expression. It was the same doubt she'd been seeing in faces throughout the ship for weeks now. Her fellow humans were embarrassed by her fear. The alien crew members were confused by it, and the command staff was beginning to question whether she was fit for deep space assignments. "Chen with me," Martinez said curtly. Ember followed the captain out of the mess hall, her face burning with shame. She could feel the eyes of the entire crew tracking their movement, and she knew that by the time they reached the corridor, the speculation would begin in earnest. The fragile confidence she'd built up over years of service was crumbling, and she couldn't explain why. The captain's ready room was a study in efficient minimalism. A desk, 2 chairs, a few personal items that spoke of a life dedicated to service rather than comfort. Martinez gestured for Ember to sit before settling behind her desk, her expression thoughtful. "Talk to me, Specialist," she said finally. "And I don't want the official report or the diplomatic non-answers. I want the truth." Ember stared at her hands, trying to find words for something she didn't fully understand herself. "There's something wrong with them, Captain. The Kethmori. I can't explain it, but every instinct I have screams at me to run when I'm around them." "Instincts can be unreliable," Martinez said gently, "especially when dealing with species that evolved under different conditions. What specifically bothers you about them?" "Everything." The word came out as a whisper. The way they move, like they're always hunting, the way they watch people when they think no one is looking. Their language. "Captain, I've studied 17 different alien languages, and I've never encountered anything like Kethmori's syntax. It's almost like it was designed to hide meaning rather than convey it." Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Explain." "Most languages evolved to be efficient, to convey maximum information with minimum effort. But Kethmori has these embedded contextual layers that can completely change the meaning of a statement depending on who's listening. It's like they're constantly speaking in code, even in casual conversation." "That could simply be a cultural adaptation," Martinez pointed out. "Many species develop complex linguistic protocols as a form of social bonding or hierarchy establishment." Ember shook her head. "It's not social, Captain. It's predatory. I've been running linguistic analysis on their conversations, and there are patterns that shouldn't exist. Subliminal triggers, psychological manipulation techniques embedded in the grammar itself. It's like their entire language evolved to be a weapon." Captain was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled as she considered Ember's words. "Have you documented any of this analysis?"
"Some of it."
"But every time I try to compile a comprehensive report, something happens. Equipment malfunctions, data corruption, interruptions. It's like the ship doesn't want me to finish it." "Specialist, you're describing paranoid ideation. That's a serious psychological condition that could—" "I know how it sounds," Ember interrupted, her voice stronger now. "But Captain, what if I'm right? What if everyone else is wrong, and the Kethmori aren't what they seem? Shouldn't we at least consider the possibility?" Martinez studied her for what felt like an eternity. Ember could see the calculation happening behind those grey eyes, weighing the reliability of a valued crew member against the potential diplomatic disaster of questioning their allies' motives. "I'll tell you what," the captain said finally. "I'm going to give you 1 week to compile your evidence. Everything you think you've discovered about the Kethmori, documented and analyzed according to standard intelligence protocols. If you can present me with concrete proof that they pose a threat to this ship or the Coalition, I'll take it seriously. But if all you have are feelings and suspicions, you'll transfer me to a groundside posting," Ember finished. "I'll recommend you for psychological evaluation and possible medical discharge," Martinez corrected. "This mission is too important for personnel who can't perform their duties."
Ember nodded, understanding the stakes.
1 week to prove that her fears were justified or watch her career disappear. As she left the captain's ready room, she felt the weight of the impossible task ahead of her. How do you prove that monsters exist when everyone else sees only friends? The corridors of the Meridian's edge hummed with activity as she made her way back to her quarters. Night shift was beginning, and the lighting had dimmed to simulate natural circadian rhythms. In the artificial twilight, every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes, and every distant sound could be footsteps following her. She was being paranoid, she knew that. The same rational part of her mind that made her such an effective translator insisted that her fears were irrational, that she was seeing patterns where none existed. But that small, primitive part of her brain, the part that had kept humans alive in caves and forests long before they reached for the stars, continued to whisper warnings she couldn't ignore. Her quarters were small but comfortable, designed for long-term deep space assignment. As she settled at her desk and activated her personal computer, Ember tried to push aside the feeling that she was being watched. The ship's security was absolute. No one could access crew quarters without authorization. She was safe here. The first data files loaded slowly, linguistic analysis software parsing through weeks of recorded Kethmori conversations. Ember had been working on this project in secret, using off-duty time and borrowed processing power to analyze speech patterns, tonal variations, and contextual meanings. What she had found defied everything she knew about alien communication. The Kethmori language contained embedded command structures that shouldn't exist in any natural communication system. Specific phonetic combinations that triggered subconscious responses in mammalian brains, psychological pressure points that could influence decision-making without the listener being aware of it. It was subtle, sophisticated, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. But subtle wasn't enough for Captain Martinez. She needed proof, documentation, something that would stand up to scientific scrutiny and convince a skeptical command structure. Ember pulled up her most recent analysis, a detailed breakdown of a conversation between Ambassador Veltar and the ship's chief medical officer. On the surface, it had been a routine discussion about Kethmori dietary requirements and medical needs, but embedded in the ambassador's responses were linguistic triggers designed to reinforce trust and suppress suspicion. The medical officer had left the meeting with a completely different opinion about Kethmori biochemistry than he'd entered with, and he seemed to have no memory of changing his mind. Ember's hands moved quickly across the interface, cross-referencing linguistic patterns with psychological response markers. The evidence was there, hidden in plain sight, but presenting it in a way that others could understand was like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen light. A soft chime from her door interrupted her concentration. She glanced at the time display. 0247 hours. Who would be visiting her quarters at this time of night? For a moment, her paranoia flared. What if the Kethmori had discovered her investigation? What if they were coming to silence her before she could present her findings? The rational part of her mind reasserted itself. The ship's security protocols would have announced any unauthorized visitors. It was probably Torres or another crew member checking on her after the scene in the mess hall. She saved her work and approached the door, activating the external viewer. The corridor was empty. Ember frowned, checking the timestamp on the door chime. It had definitely activated, but there was no one visible outside her quarters. She expanded the viewer's range, scanning the adjacent corridors, but saw only the standard night shift lighting and the occasional patrol bot making its rounds. Maybe it had been a system malfunction. The Meridian's edge was an older ship, and minor technical glitches weren't uncommon. She was about to return to her desk when she noticed something that made her blood freeze in her veins. There, on the floor just outside her door, was a small object that hadn't been there before. From the viewer's angle, she couldn't make out details, but it was clearly artificial, something left deliberately for her to find. Every instinct screamed at her not to open the door, but curiosity and the need for evidence overrode her caution. She activated the manual lock override and stepped into the corridor, her heart pounding as she looked down at the object. It was a small crystal, no larger than her thumb, carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and move in the low light. The craftsmanship was unmistakably Kethmori, but the symbols were unlike anything in their official language database. As she bent to examine it more closely, she realized that the carvings weren't random decorations. They spelled out her name, not her rank or her official designation, but her personal name, Ember. In a script that officially didn't exist, left outside her quarters by someone who shouldn't know where she lived. Her hand shaking, she picked up the crystal and retreated to her quarters, sealing the door behind her with every lock and security measure available. As she held the artifact under her desk lamp, the symbols seemed to pulse with their own inner light. and she could swear she heard something. A whisper, a voice, calling her name in the darkness. The Kethmori knew who she was. They knew what she was doing, and somehow they wanted her to know that they knew. Ember set the crystal on her desk and returned to her computer with renewed urgency. 1 week was no longer enough time to build a case against the Kethmori. It might be all the time she had left to stay alive. As she dove back into her analysis, the crystal continued to pulse softly in the corner of her vision, a constant reminder that in the vast darkness of space, sometimes the things we fear the most are the ones watching us back. The hunt had begun, and she was no longer sure who was the predator and who was the prey. Ember barely slept that night. Every shadow in her quarters seemed to hide watching eyes, and every sound from the ship's ventilation system could have been footsteps in the walls. The Kethmori crystal sat on her desk like a malevolent eye, its carved symbols occasionally catching the light from her computer screen in ways that made them seem alive. By 0600 hours, she had consumed enough stimulant patches to keep an entire squad awake. But she had also made a breakthrough. Hidden in the ship's communication logs, buried beneath layers of routine transmissions and diplomatic correspondence, she had found something that changed everything. The Kethmori weren't just using their linguistic manipulation techniques on the crew, they were coordinating with someone outside the ship. The transmissions were disguised as routine status reports to their homeworld, but Ember's analysis revealed embedded data streams that had nothing to do with diplomacy. Navigation charts, crew psychological profiles, weapons specifications, and most disturbing of all, detailed behavioral studies of every species aboard the Meridian's edge. They weren't just passengers or allies, they were gathering intelligence. But intelligence for what purpose? Ember copied the data to an encrypted storage device and sealed it inside her personal effects. If something happened to her, maybe someone would eventually discover the truth. She checked the time. 0630 hours. The morning shift change would begin soon, and with it would come her best opportunity to present her findings to Captain Martinez. A soft knock at her door made her jump, but this time the security viewer showed a familiar face. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's chief psychologist, stood in the corridor with a concerned expression. Ember hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Elena, what are you doing here so early? I could ask you the same thing, Doctor. Vasquez replied, stepping into the quarters and noticing the scattered data tablets and empty stimulant patches. Sarah asked me to check on you. She's concerned about your psychological state. Ember felt a stab of betrayal. She thinks I'm losing my mind. She thinks you're under a lot of stress, and stress can affect judgment. Elena's voice carried the practiced calm of someone accustomed to dealing with unstable personnel. Tell me about the crystal. The question hit Ember like a physical blow. What crystal? The one on your desk. Elena nodded toward the Kethmori artifact. Sarah mentioned that you've been collecting evidence against our allies. She's worried that you might be experiencing paranoid delusions. Something in Elena's tone made Ember step back slightly. The psychologist's usual warmth was absent, replaced by a clinical detachment that set off every alarm in Ember's head. How did Captain Martinez know about the crystal? I never mentioned it to anyone. Ember, you're not thinking clearly. You told Sarah about it yesterday during your meeting, don't you remember? But Ember did remember, with perfect clarity. She had never mentioned the crystal to the captain. The artifact had been left for her hours after that meeting, and she had told no one about its existence. Either Dr. Vasquez was mistaken, or she was lying. Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Ember said, backing toward her desk. Something is wrong on this ship. The Kethmori aren't what they claim to be, and I have evidence. Evidence of what? Alien visitors leaving you presents? Conversations that no one else remembers having. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. Ember, these are classic symptoms of acute stress reaction combined with paranoid ideation. You need help. Ember's hand found the crystal on her desk, and the moment her fingers touched its surface, everything changed. The carved symbols flared to life with a cold alien light, and suddenly she could hear them. Voices speaking in frequencies just below the threshold of human perception. The Kethmori weren't just on the ship. They were in the walls, in the air systems, in places where they shouldn't be able to exist, and they were talking about her. The primary subject has discovered the monitoring crystal, a voice whispered in the darkness. Psychological conditioning of secondary subjects proceeding as planned. The human vessel will reach the designated coordinates in 47 standard hours. What about the translator? Another voice, this one unmistakably belonging to Ambassador Veltar. She continues to resist our influence. Irrelevant. Once we reach the harvesting zone, resistance becomes meaningless. The human species shows promise, but they require proper conditioning. This ship will serve as the initial test population. Elena was still talking, her voice a distant buzz compared to the alien conversation flooding through the crystal. But Ember could see something else now, a subtle wrongness in the psychologist's appearance. Her eyes didn't track quite right, and her movements had the precise, artificial quality of someone being controlled. Elena, Ember whispered, when was the last time you made your own decision? The psychologist paused mid-sentence, her expression flickering for just a moment. In that brief instant, Ember saw confusion and fear in her eyes. The real Elena, trapped somewhere beneath layers of alien influence. I don't. Elena's voice wavered, then steadied again as the programming reasserted itself. Ember, you need to come with me to the medical bay. We can help you. The crystal's voices grew louder, more urgent. The primary subject has discovered the control frequency. Initiate containment protocol immediately. Ember didn't wait to see what containment protocol meant. She grabbed her data storage device and the crystal, then bolted for the door. Elena tried to stop her, moving with inhuman speed and coordination, but Ember had the advantage of desperation. She dodged around the psychologist and ran for the nearest emergency access shaft. The corridors of the Meridian's edge were beginning to fill with the morning shift, but Ember barely noticed the startled faces of crew members as she raced past them. She needed to reach Captain Martinez, needed to show her the evidence before the Keth Mori could complete whatever they were planning. 47 hours until they reached the harvesting zone. Whatever that meant, it couldn't be good. Behind her, she could hear footsteps. Too many footsteps. Moving with the same coordinated precision she had seen in Elena. How many of the crew were already under alien influence? How many of her friends and colleagues were no longer themselves? The bridge was 3 decks up and halfway across the ship. Under normal circumstances, it would be a 5-minute walk. Running at full speed while avoiding what might be compromised crew members, it felt like an eternity. Ember took maintenance passages and service corridors, following routes that she hoped the Keth Mori hadn't mapped yet. She was 2 decks away from the bridge when the ship's internal communication system crackled to life with Captain Martinez's voice. All personnel, we have a medical emergency in Section 7. Specialist Chen is experiencing a severe psychological breakdown and may be dangerous to herself and others. If you see her, do not approach. Contact security immediately. Ember's heart sank. Either the captain was already compromised, or the Keth Mori had found a way to manipulate the ship's systems. Either way, she was now a fugitive on her own vessel, hunted by the people she had served alongside for years. The crystal in her hand pulsed with increasing urgency, and the alien voices became clearer. Subject has reached secondary containment zone. Deploy hunting teams to all primary access routes. The harvesting schedule cannot be delayed. Hunting teams. The phrase sent ice through Ember's veins. She pressed herself against the wall of a maintenance corridor and tried to think. The bridge was no longer an option. Security would be watching all the primary routes. But there was another way to get word out, a backup communication system that few people knew about. The ship's emergency beacon was located in the engineering section, designed to send distress signals even if the main communication array was damaged. If she could reach it, she might be able to transmit her evidence to Coalition Command before the Keth Mori stopped her. She changed direction, heading deeper into the ship's bowels where the heavy machinery and life support systems hummed with constant activity. The engineering sections were maze-like, filled with pipes and conduits and machinery that created perfect hiding spots. But they were also the domain of Chief Engineer Korvok, and she wasn't sure if the Zentorian was still himself. The crystal's whispers guided her through the corridors, revealing the locations of Keth Mori hunters with unnerving precision. She began to realize that the artifact wasn't just a message. It was a tool, designed to help her navigate their surveillance network. But why would they give her something that helped her evade capture? The answer came as she approached the engineering section's main access tunnel. Through the crystal, she could hear Ambassador Veltar speaking directly to her, his voice carrying across impossible distances. Greetings, Ember Chen. By now you have realized that your situation has changed significantly. She pressed herself against a bulkhead, looking around wildly for the source of the voice, but the corridor was empty. Do not be alarmed. I am not physically present. The crystal allows, for certain, communications across space and time. You have proven most interesting, Specialist Chen. Most of your species succumbs to our influence within hours of exposure. You have resisted for weeks, "What do you want?" she whispered, feeling foolish for talking to empty air. "To understand. Humans show remarkable potential as a species, but your psychological defenses are unpredictable. Some of you are easily controlled. Others, like yourself, seem immune to our standard conditioning techniques. We require additional data." The truth hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't escaping, she was being studied. The crystal, the voices, even her ability to evade capture. It was all part of an experiment. She was a lab rat running through a maze, and the Kethmori were taking notes on her behavior. "The ship is not our destination," Veltar continued. "We are bound for a coalition research station where your species has been conducting xenobiological studies. The researchers there have inadvertently discovered something that belongs to us, something we have been searching for across many star systems." Ember reached the engineering section's security door and began working on the access panel. Her fingers moved automatically while her mind processed the implications of what she was hearing. "Your fear was not irrational, Ember Chen. It was evolutionary. Your species evolved as prey animals, and some of you retain the ability to recognize predators even when they wear friendly masks. We find this fascinating." The door opened with a soft hiss, revealing the engineering section's main corridor. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in blood-colored shadows, and the air carried the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere pushed to its limits. Ember could hear movement in the distance, the regular sounds of machinery maintenance, or something else entirely. "The harvesting will begin once we reach the research station," Veltar's voice continued. "Your crew will be returned to Coalition space with modified memories and new perspectives. But you, Ember Chen, you will come with us. Your resistance makes you valuable for our studies." Ember found herself laughing, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "You're going to kidnap me for alien science experiments. That's your master plan?" "Not experiments. Evolution. Your species stands at a crossroads, much as ours did millennia ago. You can choose to become prey, as the other races have done, or you can join us as hunters. The choice is yours." The emergency beacon control room was just ahead, its reinforced door standing slightly ajar. Ember approached cautiously, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. But what choice did she have? Even if the Kethmori were manipulating her movements, she had to try to get word out. The control room was empty, except for the massive communication array that dominated the far wall. Banks of monitors displayed the ship's status, course heading, and current position. Still 17 hours from the research station. If she could transmit her evidence now, maybe Coalition Command could intercept them before they reached their destination. She activated the emergency beacon and began uploading her data files. The process would take several minutes, during which she would be completely vulnerable. But as the upload progressed, something strange happened. The ship's course began to change. Through the crystal, she could hear confusion in the Kethmori voices. "Navigation systems have been compromised. Course correction is not responding to our commands. The human vessel is receiving external signals. Source unknown. Scan for coalition vessels in the immediate area. The humans may have discovered our intentions." Ember watched the navigation display with growing amazement. The Meridian's edge was turning away from its original course, accelerating toward a different set of coordinates. Someone, or something, was taking control of the ship. The upload completed just as the control room door exploded inward. 3 figures entered, moving with the fluid precision of trained killers. They wore coalition uniforms, but Ember could see the telltale signs of Kethmori control. The dead eyes, the unnatural coordination, the way they moved without regard for their own safety. Lieutenant Torres was among them, his face blank of any emotion as he raised a plasma pistol in her direction. "Stand down, Specialist. You will come with us now." "Sorry, Lieutenant," Ember said, backing toward the emergency transmitter. "But I don't think you're really driving anymore." She slammed her hand down on the manual transmission button, sending out a general distress call on all coalition frequencies. The signal would carry her location, her evidence, and a warning that the Meridian's edge had been compromised. Torres fired, but his shot went wide as the ship suddenly lurched to one side. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the vessel, and the lights flickered as something massive impacted the hull. Through the crystal, Ambassador Veltar's voice carried a note of genuine concern for the first time. "Ember Chen, you have made a significant error in judgment. The signal you transmitted was not received by your coalition command." The control room's main display activated, showing the space around the Meridian's edge. Ember's blood turned to ice as she saw what surrounded them: ships. Dozens of them, sleek and organic-looking vessels that seemed to be made of the same translucent material as Kethmori's skin. They had been waiting, hidden in the darkness between stars. "The signal was received by us," Deltar continued. "You have called the fleet to begin the harvesting early. Your resistance has provided valuable data, but the experiment is now complete." Torres and his companions moved toward her again, but before they could reach her, the ship's artificial gravity failed. Everyone in the control room was suddenly floating, and in the chaos that followed, Ember managed to grab onto a support beam near the emergency transmitter. Through the ship's hull, she could hear new sounds: cutting tools, the screech of metal being peeled away like fruit skin. The Kethmori fleet was boarding the Meridian's edge, and there was nowhere left to run. But as she floated in the zero gravity, clutching the crystal that had revealed her enemy's plans, Ember realized something that gave her a spark of hope. The Kethmori had made one critical error in their assessment of human psychology. They assumed that fear made her weak. They didn't understand that for humans, fear could also make them angry. And angry humans, as the galaxy was about to discover, were very dangerous indeed. The boarding sound stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse than the chaos that had preceded it. Emergency lighting cast twisted shadows throughout the control room as gravity slowly returned, bringing with it the acrid smell of burned metal and something else, something organic and wrong. Ember pulled herself upright, still clutching the Kethmori crystal, and noticed that Torres and his companions had gone completely still. They hung in the air like marionettes with their strings cut, their eyes vacant and staring. Through the crystal's whispered communications, she could hear the reason for their sudden inactivity. Primary control nodes have been established throughout the human vessel. All biological assets are now under direct neural interface. Begin systematic harvesting of genetic and psychological data. The voices weren't coming from the ship anymore. They were coming from space itself, from the fleet of organic vessels that had surrounded the Meridian's edge, like antibodies around an infection. Whatever the Kethmori truly were, they were far more than the peaceful traders they had pretended to be. But they had made a mistake in giving her the crystal. Through its connection to their communication network, Ember could hear everything, including the location of their central command node. The massive ship at the center of the fleet wasn't just a vessel. It was alive, a creature the size of a small moon that had been converted into a living spacecraft. And inside its biomechanical chambers, she could hear the screams of other species, thousands of them. Beings from across the galaxy who had been harvested for their genetic and psychological uniqueness. The research station that Kethmori had mentioned wasn't their destination. It was their trap. Coalition researchers had discovered something buried in an asteroid field, the remains of another harvest ship, one that had been destroyed millennia ago by a species that had refused to submit. Inside that wreckage were weapons, technologies, and most importantly, a method for breaking the Kethmori's neural control systems. And the Coalition had accidentally activated it. Through the crystal's connection, Ember could sense the panic spreading through the Kethmori fleet. Their perfect trap was collapsing because their prey had found the tools left behind by previous victims. The research station was broadcasting a signal that was disrupting their control systems, and ships across the galaxy were reporting that their harvested populations were beginning to wake up. But the signal had a limited range, and the Kethmori had a solution. If they could destroy the research station and capture its personnel for study, they could develop countermeasures to the awakening signal. The Meridian's edge had been diverted to serve as a delivery system, a Coalition ship arriving with legitimate credentials, carrying a hidden cargo of Kethmori infiltrators. Ember understood now why they had wanted her alive. Her resistance to their control made her valuable, but it also made her a threat. If humans could naturally resist their influence, then humanity represented a potential weakness in their harvest system. The crystal pulsed in her hand, and suddenly she could hear Captain Martinez's voice cutting through the alien chatter. "All hands, this is the captain. Unknown hostiles have boarded the ship and are attempting to take control of crew personnel. Resistance protocols are now in effect. Seal all sections and prepare for combat operations." Ember felt a surge of hope. Martinez wasn't under alien control, yet. But that wouldn't last long if the Kethmori reached her. Moving carefully through the control room, Ember began working on the emergency communication array. She had transmitted her evidence to what she thought was Coalition Command, that the signal had been intercepted by the Kethmori fleet. However, the transmitter was still active, and she might be able to reach the research station that the aliens were so desperate to destroy. The process was complicated by the fact that she had to work around Torres and his companions, who remained frozen in their controlled state. Their eyes tracked her movements, but they couldn't respond to whatever commands they were receiving. The neural interface that gave the Kethmori such perfect control over their victims also created a vulnerability. Too much input could cause system overload. Through the crystal, she could hear Ambassador Voltar's voice again, but this time he was speaking to someone else. The human translator continues to resist integration. Recommend immediate physical acquisition for detailed study. The awakening signal has reached 17 star systems. Priority target is the source of the interference. The human vessel will proceed to the research station as planned. What about the resistant subject? She will be collected after the primary objective is completed. Her data is valuable but not essential to current operations. Ember smiled grimly as she finished configuring the transmitter. The Kethmori had just made another mistake. They had told her exactly where they were most vulnerable. She activated the emergency beacon and began transmitting on the frequency the research station would be monitoring. But instead of sending her evidence about Kethmori infiltration, she transmitted something else entirely. The complete linguistic analysis of their communication system, including the embedded command structures and neural interface protocols. If the researchers at the station were as smart as she hoped they were, they would understand what they were receiving. The Kethmori language wasn't just a method of communication, it was a weapon system, designed to hack the neural pathways of other species. And every transmission, every conversation, every diplomatic exchange had been slowly conditioning coalition personnel to accept alien control. But weapons could be turned against their creators. The transmission completed just as the control room door opened again. This time, it wasn't controlled crew members who entered, it was something else entirely. The figure that stepped through the doorway looked vaguely humanoid, but its translucent skin revealed the mechanical and biological systems beneath. This was a Kethmori in its true form, no longer bothering with the illusion of being harmless traders. Ember Chen, it said in a voice that bypassed her ears entirely, speaking directly to her brain through frequencies that shouldn't exist. You have caused significant disruption to our operations. Good, she replied, backing toward the emergency controls. I was hoping for more than just significant. The creature moved closer, its elongated limbs flowing like liquid as it approached. Your species fascinates us. Most races surrender when they understand the futility of resistance. Others fight until they are exterminated. But humans do something else entirely. You adapt. We're stubborn that way. Indeed. Your transmission to the research station will be unsuccessful. We have already severed their communication array. Your evidence will reach no one. Ember felt her heart sink, but she kept her expression neutral. Maybe not, but you're here talking to me instead of harvesting whatever you came for.
That suggests I've already disrupted your timeline.
The creature paused, its head tilting in a gesture that was almost curious.
Elaborate. You're running out of time. Every minute you spend dealing with me is another minute for the awakening signal to spread. How many of your harvest worlds have gone dark in the last hour? How many controlled populations are starting to remember who they really are? Through the crystal, she could hear the confirmation of her guess. Panic was spreading through the Kethmori fleet as reports came in from across the galaxy. The signal from the research station was having a cascade effect, awakening populations that had been under control for decades. The signal will be eliminated, the creature said, but there was uncertainty in its synthesized voice. The research station will be destroyed, and the disruption will end. Will it? Ember asked. Because I'm guessing the signal isn't coming from the station anymore. The coalition researchers were smart enough to copy it, to spread it, to make sure it couldn't be stopped by destroying a single location. The creature's form shifted, becoming more angular and predatory. You are speculating. Am I? Then why are you still here? Why aren't you already at the research station, collecting your prize? Could it be that the prize isn't there anymore? The truth was written in the alien's posture, in the way its attention was divided between her and the communications flowing through the crystal network. The research station had been evacuated hours ago, its personnel and data relocated to hidden locations throughout Coalition space. The awakening signal was now being broadcast from dozens of sources, and the Kethmori couldn't destroy them all. Your resistance is admirable but ultimately meaningless, the creature said. We have harvested civilizations across thousands of star systems. One species cannot change the fundamental nature of the galaxy. You're right, Ember agreed. One species can't change everything. But we're not just one species anymore, are we? Every race you've controlled, every civilization you've harvested, they're all waking up, and they're all going to remember what you did to them. The creature lunged toward her with inhuman speed. But Ember was ready. She grabbed a plasma cutter from the emergency toolkit and fired it directly at the creature's central mass. The beam passed through its translucent skin and struck something vital. the biomechanical components that allowed it to maintain physical cohesion. The Kethmori shrieked, a sound that came through the crystal rather than through the air. Its form began to collapse, losing structural integrity as its internal systems failed. But as it died, it managed to say one last thing. The fleet will not retreat. Your ship will be destroyed rather than allowed to carry the awakening frequency to other systems. Through the crystal's network, Ember could hear the confirmation. The massive harvest ship at the center of the fleet was charging weapon systems that could reduce the Meridian's edge to atoms. The Kethmori had decided that eliminating the evidence was more important than capturing new specimens. But they had underestimated human stubbornness one more time. Captain Martinez's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands, prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. We have 30 seconds before hostile weapons reach firing solutions. Ember felt the familiar vibration that preceded a hyperspace transition, but something was wrong. The ship's course wasn't taking them away from the Kethmori fleet. It was taking them directly toward the massive harvest ship at its center. Through the crystal, she could hear the alien panic as they realized what was happening. The Meridian's edge wasn't trying to escape, it was attacking. Captain Martinez to all Coalition frequencies. The captain's voice cut through the Kethmori chatter. This is the Coalition vessel, Meridian's Edge, transmitting final mission report. We have confirmed the existence of a hostile species designation Kethmori, operating throughout Coalition space under the guise of peaceful traders. These beings have been conducting systematic psychological manipulation and harvesting operations on multiple worlds. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace directly inside the Kethmori fleet formation. Proximity alarms screamed as the Meridian's Edge found itself surrounded by organic vessels, many of them larger than space stations. The enemy has demonstrated the ability to control Coalition personnel through linguistic and neural manipulation techniques. They have infiltrated our diplomatic corps, our research stations, and our military command structure. Trust no one who has been in prolonged contact with Kethmori representatives. Ember could see the harvest ship growing larger through the control room's viewports. The Meridian's Edge was accelerating directly toward its central core, where the biomechanical systems that controlled thousands of enslaved minds were located. We are transmitting all available intelligence on Kethmori operations, including linguistic analysis and countermeasure protocols developed by specialist Ember Chen. Use this information to break their control systems and free their harvested populations. The captain's final words were almost lost in the chaos of impact warnings and structural stress alerts. Remember, fear isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the thing that keeps you alive long enough to fight back. This is Captain Sarah Martinez, signing off. The Meridian's Edge struck the harvest ship with the force of a kinetic weapon, its mass and momentum carrying it deep into the alien vessel's biomechanical heart. Emergency force fields flickered and failed as the two ships became locked together in a twisted embrace of metal and organic material. Through the crystal, Ember could hear the harvest ship's death scream, a psychic wail of agony, as its central nervous system was severed by the Coalition vessel's impact. Around them, the smaller Kethmori ships began to lose cohesion as their controlling intelligence died. Emergency systems kicked in aboard the Meridian's Edge, sealing off compromised sections and maintaining life support in the areas that remained intact. Ember found herself in one of the few sections that had survived the impact, surrounded by the wreckage of the control room but still alive. The crystal in her hand had gone dark, its connection to the Kethmori network severed along with everything else. But through the ship's emergency communication system, she could hear something that filled her with hope. Human voices, free of alien control, reporting that they were alive and ready to continue the fight. Captain Martinez's voice came over the intercom, weak but determined. All surviving personnel, this is the captain. We have successfully disrupted the enemy command vessel. Coalition rescue ships are en route to our position. The awakening signal is spreading throughout the galaxy, and the Kethmori harvesting operation appears to be collapsing. Ember pulled herself upright and made her way toward the emergency beacon controls. The transmitter was damaged but still functional, and she had one more message to send. Coalition Command, this is Specialist Ember Chen aboard the Meridian's Edge. The Kethmori threat has been neutralized in this sector, but their operations span multiple star systems. Look for the signs: linguistic manipulation, psychological conditioning, personnel who have changed their opinions without remembering why. She paused, thinking of all the crew members who had dismissed her fears, who had called her paranoid and weak. They had been wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to feel vindicated. Too many good people had suffered for the truth to feel like a victory. Most importantly, she continued, remember that fear isn't always irrational. Sometimes it's evolution telling you that the thing wearing a friendly face is actually a predator. Trust those instincts. They might save your life. As she finished the transmission, Ember could hear the sound of rescue ships docking with the Meridian's edge. The immediate crisis was over, but she knew it was only the beginning. Somewhere in the galaxy, other Kethmori fleets were still operating, still harvesting civilizations that had never learned to recognize the monsters among them. But now they had a warning. Now they had a weapon, the knowledge that their fears might be trying to save them, and the tools to fight back against an enemy that had hidden in plain sight for millennia. The hunt was over, but the war for the galaxy's freedom had just begun. And this time, humanity would not be the prey. Through the ship's viewports, Ember could see the debris of the harvest ship drifting in space like the bones of some massive predator. Inside that wreckage were the remains of control systems that had enslaved entire civilizations, reduced to scrap metal and failing biological components. It was beautiful in a way, the death of a nightmare that had haunted the galaxy for longer than recorded history. And it had died because one human had been too stubborn to stop being afraid, even when everyone around her had called it weakness. As the rescue teams began evacuating survivors from the Meridian's edge, Ember tucked the dark crystal into her pocket. It was evidence of what they had faced, proof of the enemy that had almost destroyed them all. But more than that, it was a reminder that sometimes the things we fear in the dark are real, and sometimes being afraid is the only thing that saves us all.